Welcome back to Natural 2, our D&D and tabletop role-playing game talk show slash podcast, where we discuss all the fun things in this wonderful hobby of ours. And this week, we are covering a topic that I think is actually really important to discuss and actually get out there, and that is the topic of it is okay to end your D&D campaign. And I guess more specifically, it is okay to end these like long-term campaigns that the DM might sound or might feel somewhat shackled to, but we will get into that. I guess, example that we're going to be talking a lot about is James and I were in a game that ran for almost 2 years that we ended somewhat recently, and we think that ending it was the correct choice for a spectrum of reasons that we will go over, but that is what we will be discussing today.
We were talking before the camera started rolling about how this is a topic that people need to talk about, need to hear advice about. It's one of the things that probably comes up most frequently in online communities, but it has not, at least in my view, been covered often or extensively by commentators in our hobby community. And I don't know if that's because it's kind of if they think of it as kind of a bummer or something. But you can't, at some point, you can't start your exciting new campaign and play with your fun new character concept without ending the previous one. So we're all going to go through it at some point.
And you're kind of speaking to exactly the process that happened with our campaign, where, to give it a little bit of context, for a few months before we actually did end it, I was feeling like all of these weird feelings and emotions about the game that I wasn't able to fully, I guess, either come to terms with or admit. And so I was trying to analyze all these other things like, oh, maybe I'm not doing this right, or the players don't enjoy this thing, or trying to find the problem that was making me feel, weird about everything. And then I had that one conversation with you where I asked kind of the simple question of, if we were going to play a different campaign entirely next week, would that be more interesting than what we're doing right now? And, I don't think the answer was as black and white as it is now, but it got the ball rolling of like, yeah, we could be doing something more exciting or something that we enjoy more if we did something different. So why are we still doing the campaign that we are doing? And that ultimately, I think, was the turning point of where it went from like, I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to handle this, and all these worries, to like, yeah, that is the answer. Like, that legitimately is the best answer. So why aren't we doing that? And then that's a whole other part of the conversation of what actually, like, applying that advice looks like, and, how you have to handle that, and the conversations and all that fun stuff, or not fun stuff. But yeah, I think overall, the reason that this doesn't get talked about is if you ever look at a Reddit post or some D&D post of like, oh, my group has this problem XYZ, the responses that are like, well, talk to your group or kick out the problem player, that are objectively the right answer, don't get nearly the amount of tension or attention as the posts that are like, oh, well, maybe you should try and like take this magical item away from him and then turn him against another player and then have an intervention. It's like, that's not the right answer, but it is a lot more interesting and exciting, so people kind of, I guess, read those more and enjoy them more. So I think that's why this isn't a piece of advice that gets handed out all that often.
I think it also speaks to something that we talked about in our short video on communication, which is that people are looking for the life hack. The simple, straightforward answer that is actually going to provide a solution, which is either kick the guy out or talk to the guy like an adult or end the game, are those are specifically the things that the person is often trying to avoid for whatever reason. They, even though that's what they need to do in most of these cases, what the reason they're online looking for answers a lot of the time, I feel, is they're looking for the trick. They're looking for the one weird trick that keeps me from having to be honest to my friends.
I mean, that is all of it, at least on the DM side. And again, that's going to be the side that I'm coming from, is this absolute necessity to avoid the potentially bad things, or the things that you've built up as being these huge problems. Like, where it was really coming from when I was going through this, like, honestly difficult time with the game, where I was getting mentally burned out by just thinking about the game. Um, all of it stemmed from, I thought that if I ended the campaign, that I would either be really disappointing people, I would be letting down these friends that I am now intensely connected to, that I care about a fair bit, or that the group would suffer or break apart because I ended the campaign. And also the fact that I didn't think that I had, I don't know if support's the right term, but I didn't think that the group was on the same page as me. I thought that if I ended the campaign, everyone would turn around and be like, but it was going so well. Like, why would you ever do such a thing? And so that is the reason I got so bad in shape about it, is I didn't want to have that difficult conversation or cause those problems that would have really been a bigger problem than the game being bad. Another thing I need to point out is the game wasn't awful. The game just wasn't as good as it could have been, or what we were all excited to play. That's also a big part of the conversation to be had. Once you realize that having these difficult conversations aren't nearly as bad as you build them up in your mind to be, that makes communication with your group so much easier, because it removes that, like, icky feeling in your heart that you get, those butterflies in your stomach, where you are so confident and comfortable with your relationship with these people that you can sit down and be like, yeah, you know, our game is really suffering, we should probably fix this. And once I had those conversations with everybody, I felt so much better. Like, it's honestly probably a little bit concerning that I was this emotionally distraught over a D&D game, but that's what it was. And so once I had those conversations and felt a bit of that relief, I was like, oh wow, I forgot that I enjoy playing D&D, because I was like so worked up with this stress. So that is why I think it's important to talk about this, is I think there's a lot of people in that situation that need to hear this. And that's hopefully what we're addressing or getting out there, or I guess showcasing. So
Let me say, as your sidekick on this topic here, that you and anyone watching, you should not feel bad about feeling strongly about your group, your campaign, your hobby, your story, whatever the case may be. I'm going to call here comes a warm take. I'm going to call some people to the carpet right now. All these goobers that their first and only answer is, it's just a game. Yeah, it is a game, but no, it's not just a game. And I don't mean in some weird, like, you know, nightmare, like, make my wife call me my character's name way. I mean that if it didn't affect us, we wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, people who watch sports on TV care about what's happening, no matter how futile or how silly. You know, they're jumping out of their recliner and screaming at the television for a reason, and that's part of the fun. You ride a roller coaster to be frightened. We do these things because they affect us. So don't feel ashamed or bashful that you've been affected. It just means that it's working. It means that you're in the right place.
Well, I think the better explanation of what I was trying to say is, if I was just this emotionally affected by the game, then that would probably be bad. But I think what I was more emotionally distraught over is I thought that ending the campaign was going to affect the group, and the group is probably my closest network of friends right now. And so the reason I felt so strongly about it is I was like, if I end this campaign, I'm ruining all these friendships that I've built. And so, yeah, it's not strange to be that upset about a game, but if you are just upset about, like, this specific campaign, that would be where I'd be like, might want to analyze that a little bit more. But yeah, I agree with what you said. So I want to ask you a more direct question, because when I first brought this question up to you, that, again, we mentioned was kind of like the turning point of you admitting or saying or just kind of analyzing yourself of, yeah, maybe this actually isn't going as good as I thought it was, or maybe there are bigger issues I'm not really thinking about, because that was a long conversation we had. So I guess as the player, realizing this in real time, or at least during the conversation, what I guess were like your thoughts, or what do you think you, I guess, like gained by going through that and now knowing that as a player? Like, I don't know if my question is exactly defined, but how was that on your side?
So it started to sink in for me, and it took me a long time to get there. I really had to uh, think about it for a long time, have it sort of beat me over the head. Um, and I was still having fun with my character, and that because I was enjoying my character so much, it I think gave me some temporary hit points in terms of hanging in there, as long as I did before it really started to sink in. Like, um, for me, it was, and again, I don't want to take anything away from what we did and from the campaign. It was really just a great campaign. And I think that part of why we all more or less decided as a group, like, it's time to move on, was so that we could kind of quit while we were ahead.
Yeah, like preserve what we had done versus potentially tainting it with this other mentality.
Remember it as a great campaign
Mhm.
and as a great time. Um, but I started to realize that for really what was the first time in the entire run, I was realizing that I wasn't looking forward to the next session.
Mhm.
Um, where I had virtually always been in all the prior weeks.
Mhm.
Uh, and I still enjoy playing D&D. I mean, I just enjoy playing games, so it's not like I was like, man, I don't want to do this.
Mhm.
But it wasn't the same feeling of got to get back to the table, got to get to whatever is coming up next.
Mhm.
Uh, that that wasn't happening for me, and um, once that feeling hit, it was really like a, glass of water being thrown in your face. Like, whoa,
Mhm.
uh, this is something's different. Um, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I do want to take this point right now to address that, like, we've kind of almost made this sound not like a bad thing, but like not a great thing. And we touched on it very briefly about why we ended, and I want to get this across. We really all enjoyed our campaign. Like, I am so impressed on like how long we went and what we got accomplished and where we ended up. Like, there is no part of me that thinks that what we did was bad, or that like we didn't, do something great. Like, I really, really enjoyed our campaign, and I still look back on it fondly. Um, and I think the reason that ending it was the correct choice is because I felt the group kind of getting sluggish, kind of losing that ravenous hunger of like, ooh, what's next? Ooh, this, that, and the other thing. Like, we were kind of beginning to stall. And I think it was a better choice to put a cap on it and really be able to enjoy what we had done so far versus trying to drag ourselves to the ending because we had this like not necessary desire or like fake obligation to reach the traditional end. And I think that is the biggest, I guess, point to make, or the thing to get across, is you can still like the campaign you're doing, or you can still enjoy what you have done, but it is totally fine to realize that your interests have changed, because that's a natural thing that is going to happen with any group of people, or that your desires have changed, or the story that you have built is no longer interesting to you. Those are like things that are just going to happen, and you can't avoid that. So when they do, your choice is to either try to change what you are playing to adjust to what you like, which is again another valid way of handling it, or ending what you have done, realizing that you want to do something else, and then facilitating a clean transition where everyone feels good about it. Like that was, once we figured out we were going to end the campaign, was my biggest focus, is making sure everyone got out of it feeling like they got out of it well, or that they enjoyed it, or that their characters ended up in the right place, so everyone was satisfied. Which I think we also did, which was a cool thing of this whole process. So I wanted to get across that this was overall a good thing, and we all, I think it's an overall good thing, versus like, oh, it's this like kind of necessary evil that we came to accept, where really I think it was the best choice, where it almost seems like inherently it has to be a bad thing, which it isn't.
I think that this is a point where we can codify one of the actual tips,
Mhm.
one of the actual pieces of advice that you can take away from this video, dear viewer, is we ended the campaign. We didn't just quit it.
Mhm.
We didn't just all say, or you or any one person say, we're just done with that now. We're going to do something else.
Mhm.
We gave it an ending. We figured out how to actually wrap it up. We didn't just turn the switch off. So I think that that is a good way to make it hurt less, or
Mhm.
make it less sad, or make it take away some of that sense of I can't do this. That would just be too much of a bummer.
Mhm.
You can figure out how you would do right by the effort that has been put in up until this point, and give it a satisfying conclusion, even if it isn't being played out in real D&D terms.
Mhm. And for us, that looked like we eventually like had this kind of history book drafted up that explained everything up into the ending we were heading towards. But it could look like a whole other. There's many different ways you could do this with your group. Whether it's everyone gets together the next week and they just talk about what the ending is, which is somewhat what we did, but we then kind of finalized it later. Or you could all separately kind of diverge and then come together with your different endings and like what each character wanted to do, or how the party achieved this, that, or the other thing. Like whatever works for your group is what you should focus on or what you should use, but you should end the campaign versus just cutting it off or putting it on hiatus. That was one thing we talked about, of like, oh, maybe we'll do something else for a month or two and then come back. And it's like, realistically, that isn't going to work. Like once we get started on something else, no one's going to want to come back and do this. Like that is, maybe there is a like 0.001% chance that is the actual scenario with a different group, but I think more than likely if you drop from a game and try something different, you're never going to come back, and that's just something that most people should know or either accept.
I think that it would have been different if it were just you looking for a break from DMing
Mhm.
in a general sense,
Mhm.
but that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Uh, it that while we were talking about it for this campaign, for this situation, it was kind of an avoidance tactic.
Mhm.
Like it was a way to say, let's let's end it and say we didn't. Uh, which I think that we, you know, worked through that pretty quickly.
Yeah, the interesting timeline that I had when this all happened is I spoke to you on like Monday, I think was the day that we had our conversation, where it basically ended with you going, yeah, maybe the campaign isn't where I thought it was. And then I went from that conversation to one of the other players and talked to them one on one. And they also were like, yeah, maybe the campaign isn't where I want it to be. And then you got back with me and was like, yeah, let's do the next thing. Like, let's end this. Let's figure this out. And then again, the second player a few days later was in the same place. So by the time our session came around on Sunday, everyone had gone through the same like transitional period of like, oh, maybe we can still do this. Or like, and then they would move to like, well, we don't have to do that, but we could do something like this. To then eventually the weekend, everyone was like, nah, let's end this. Let's end this definitively and move on. So yeah, I think everyone had to come to terms with it, and I think that's going to be true for every group. Um, but once we kind of cut through all of the excuses and avoidance, I think everyone was on the same page, and that I think is what drove the game to actually end. because if I had opened this up to the group and half the group was like, no, 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 we can't end, and like didn't get any closer to that feeling, then that's a symbol that your game is not ready to end. But you do have to really be direct with your players when bringing this up. You can't put on the white gloves and be like, well, do you think we should end? Or like, how are you feeling about the game right now? What I found is you really had to take off the gloves, look them in the eye, and go, I am no longer having fun, and I think the game needs to end. And they're like, ooh, let's think about that. Because if you don't say those specific things and whatever vocabulary that you have, you're just going to get the default response of like, oh yeah, I'm having a great time. I'm having fun. And that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, there's a little bit of psychologist that you have to play, and knowing yourself and knowing your players. I think that the sort of drawn out individual conversations that we had were helpful for our situation, because if you had just ambushed us with it at the end of the session the previous Sunday,
Mhm.
then that's probably exactly, you would have gotten a kind of false response, or a false positive, I
Mhm.
guess, of, no, 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 that's no way, man. And even though, um, even though that wasn't, it wouldn't have been motivated by love of this campaign.
Mhm.
It would have been motivated by a different set of positive, but uh, different feelings and notions.
Yeah, well, I think
Um,
no one wants to be the odd one out. And when you're asking a group of people if they want to stop doing the thing that everyone else is engaged with, their first response before hearing anyone else is like, "Oh no, I'm enjoying it. I'm having fun." And then everyone just echoes that. So that is the problem when addressing a group with something like this.
no one wants to be the odd one out, and no one, most people don't like to hurt other people's feelings.
Mhm.
And so if and I don't even think it's a conscious thing in a lot of cases. It's this learned sort of social instinct, a lot of the time, that you have to work to overcome if that's what the situation calls for.
Mhm.
Um, being not, we need another term besides brutally honest, because it wasn't even particularly brutal.
I just like
Just
direct. That's the
just
term I usually
honest.
use.
Yeah, just honesty. Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, honest with yourself, honest with the rest of your group.
A little like caveat I guess I'll throw out there is I wouldn't use this as an excuse to campaign hop. Like every month you're like, oh, this isn't working, let's try something else, and then getting the group all excited about another thing and then hopping from that. Like, we played this campaign for a long time and we dedicated a ton of time into it. And so it wasn't something that we just kind of like willy-nilly was like, oh yeah, let's end it, let's do something else. It was a very long process to get to this point. And once we did, we're going into our next campaign or our next whatever we do with the understanding of we are going to put in more effort and more dedication than what we did previously, and we're excited to do that. Like, I would be very careful that if you are the DM kind of watching this video and getting these thoughts and kind of like, yeah, yeah, this is the answer, just be very mindful that this isn't like a get out of jail free card, or that this isn't something you should use just to like play a different story that you want to play. Like, this is a group thing, a group decision, a group process, and your group has to be at least relatively on the same page when you broach this topic. You should not use this as like a, we're ending the campaign now and doing something else, because your players might be really invested in what you're doing at that time. So that's another part that you should be very careful with when, I guess, approaching this topic or taking this advice.
You play the game together, and you kind of have to not play the game together. You
Hmm.
have to stop playing together. You have to move on to a new thing together. So it's uh, still a group project.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's the right mindset, or a good mindset that will prevent a lot of the things that people are worried about in that keep them from doing it in the first place, which is hurt
Mhm.
feelings or strife or conflict or people leaving in a huff. Um, is just bearing that in mind.
Yeah, and another really prominent point about this whole thing is if you're afraid that ending your current campaign is going to destroy your group, one of the things you might want to do is be very direct, as I like to say, and ask your players if that's the case. Like, there's nothing wrong with going to one of your players and saying, hey, if we stop playing campaign A, would you be around for campaign B? And their answer might be, nah, I think I'm done, which is fine. But I think more often than not, if you're in a group that's healthy and, you're friends with everybody, they'd be like, yeah, I'm down to play campaign B, but I want to make sure campaign A is handled well. And that's probably the correct response and what you'll most likely get. But yeah, be prepared for either answer. But that was one thing that helped like calm my fears about ending the first campaign is once I went around to all the players and asked them like, are we still gonna like be friends and play D&D after this? They're like, hell yeah. And it's like, sweet. I can no longer stay up at night worrying about my friend group getting torn to pieces.
I think that when you play a campaign for a long time, and there's been I've seen circling the internet these stories of, wow, my campaign was 5 years long. This guy's campaign was 10 years long. That guy on TV had a 40-year campaign. Blah blah blah. The longer your campaign goes, the less able I think, or the harder it becomes to separate in your mind that campaign from the hobby as a whole or your friends as a whole or D&D as a whole. And that was something that I had to remind myself was the group is still going to be there next week. The game the game of D&D is still going to be there next week. We're not uh we're not ending D&D. We're not killing Santa. Uh it's just starting a new movie, starting a new show.
One thing that no one is going to want to hear, but is like something that everybody should understand, is there is absolutely no reason or no like laurels to rest on if your campaign runs for like 5 or 6 years. Like there are so many people that I've seen on like the D&D internet community of like, oh yeah, I ran a campaign for 11 years. And it's like, sweet. Did you enjoy playing all those 11 years? And like, does it really matter that you played a single campaign for 11 years versus playing several over that same time frame? Like, there's no reward, there's no Reddit karma, there's no nothing to forcing a game to last longer than it naturally should. And so if you feel like you should end the campaign even if you've been playing it for 47 years, go for it. No one's keeping track, no one's going to reprimand you. It's just that simple. If you don't like the game, it doesn't matter how long it's been running, play the game you want to play.
Yeah, Google sunk cost fallacy
Mhm.
and take it to heart. It doesn't just mean money. It's time, it's energy, it's resources in general.
Mhm.
And if you've been a DM for 11 years, hey, respect. If you've been a DM for a month, good job. If you've been running in the same campaign for 11 years, as long as you've been having fun.
Yeah.
But that's not in and of itself. Don't keep playing just so you can get to year 12.
Mhm.
You're not NCIS. All right.
Look, that was one thought that I did have when I was coming to terms with all this. Is like, oh, we're so close to 2 years. And I sat down and I was like, why does that matter at all? And like part of me was like, oh, well, it'd be so cool to say that I ran this game for 2 years. And it's like, but that doesn't mean anything. Like, it does, say that we are a committed group that, met regularly to do that. But it's not like we're not going to keep meeting after this. So the term just switches from I ran a campaign to 2 years to I've been playing with the same D&D group every week for 2 years, which is the same thing. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was something I had to, I guess, like confront with myself and analyze and adjust, because I think that's a somewhat unhealthy mentality to have, at least for like the reason to keep the game going is to hit some arbitrary date. It doesn't make any sense.
There are good and bad reasons to keep going,
Mhm.
or to keep a particular person in the group, or to do anything.
Mhm.
So just take the time and be honest with yourself again, not to be repetitive, but that's um that's the zen of this topic.
I think we've kind of covered mostly everything that I wanted to get to, but the one last thing I did want to talk about is, I guess, like the clear benefits of doing this and like what you can kind of look forward to on the other side of this whole process. And what it really comes down to, though there's a bunch of different flavors to take from it, is you are now approaching the game with a clean slate, which is something you cannot do in an ongoing campaign. You can adjust things and try and like twist certain avenues of what you're playing to fit what you want to do now. But when you cut it off and start something completely new, every option is open to you. You can change the setting, the world, the theme, the characters, the group, the systems, the homebrew rules. You can, it's a whole new game. And that is something so exciting and so fun to play with, that is a clear benefit of doing this. So if that's what you need to like get through the icky parts of communicating and ending, that is one way of working towards what you have to look forward to.
That was another thing I think we danced around, was the idea that, well, we can divert our course
Mm-hmm.
in this campaign. We can make it something else. We can go in a different direction. And there's something to be said for being open to pivoting in a current campaign. But in our case, there was so much inertia, and there was so much that we had established about the state of the world and our characters, that it would have been goofy to try to change everything that really we needed to change.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have been a new campaign at the end of the day without
Mm-hmm.
calling it a new campaign.
And
So,
without the ability of actually having a new campaign with all the baggage of the previous one.
right. So that's I think that you'll know whether you can just make a pivot and things will be all right, or if it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, it was, again, better to we didn't trash our characters and we didn't trash our campaign. We uh gave it an ending, and now we can start wherever we want.
Mm-hmm. I guess the final thing I'll say, and this is, I guess, my message directly to DMs that are potentially in the scenario I was in. You gotta remember, and I've said this in a few of our videos, that you should be having fun. If you're not having fun, then there's a problem. And while some problems can be fixed by you identifying an issue with your campaign or an issue that you're having with a player and then addressing that, when you have this continuous and persistent feeling of just like something is off, I'm not enjoying this, or that like it's not clicking, or the group isn't like on the same page as me, if that is something that keeps coming up again and again and again, that's when you should be looking at this kind of avenue, this kind of direction. Is maybe there is something core to our campaign or core to the group that needs to be talked about or addressed, and do that. Don't linger. Don't like sit around and make excuses that maybe next week it will be better, or maybe if I do this, or maybe if I just, bide my time, the feelings will go away. They won't. They'll still be there. and you're just going to get more and more twisted up about it until you address it. So that would be my last thing is if you find yourself in this spot, and I think you would know if you are in this spot, it's that gut feeling that James referred to, then you need to address it and handle it, or I don't know, quit playing D&D, one of the two. But I would think that the optimal decision is to address it and make the game fun again. So that would be my final 2 cents on this topic.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to that either. If you have something else to add, put it in the comments. And like and subscribe. Whether you enjoyed it or not, I don't go out for all that. Oh, if you liked this video. No, like and subscribe so we can make even more videos, and eventually we'll get to one that you do like.
Yeah, but feel free to disagree with us. I mean, that's totally another thing as well, is, this worked for us, but maybe we are just making everything up as we go, and we have absolutely no idea what we're talking about. So
We're your weird uncles or your buddies from work that have been there, done that. We're gonna warn you about dating that person because we already tried and it's not worth it.
are we the uncles dating the same person or a person like that person?
I'm uncomfortable with extending this metaphor any further. It was
Yeah.
it was anguish to start with. You can ask my long-suffering wife. I get myself into more trouble trying to be cute.
Mm-hmm.
And this is starting to feel like one of those times. So
Yep.
until next week.
Have a good one.